Several years ago when the movie 1408 came out, my longtime friend and I went to the closest theater, which was about 35 miles from our hometown. As we were traveling down the highway we were talking and laughing as per the usual. I looked up toward the evening sky and noticed a very large bundle of black and dark gray clouds. They were really dense and all crowded together. In the center of the clouds there was fire. There is absolutely no other way to describe it. The clouds were ablaze in the center with the light fading as it went out toward the outer edges. There were no other clouds in sight, and the sun was not a contributing factor as it was late evening and dark out. I tried to get a picture, but my phone would not do the scene any kind of justice at all. She and I were at a loss for any type of explanation, and still today I have no idea what we were seeing. When I was pregnant with my firstborn, my ex-husband and I lived with his dad and stepmom in a small house about 15 miles outside of town. One morning everyone had left for work and such, which left me finding myself home alone. I was trying to rest on the couch in the living room when I heard a scraping sound move across the kitchen floor. It was the sound of one of the metal chairs scooting away from the table. I woke all the way and started to listen. It was then that I heard the dryer in the back of the house slam and turn on as if to dry a load of laundry. Several days later, I was home alone and was folding laundry in the living room when this blood-curdling scream sounded off directly behind the house, just outside the sliding glass door. A definite fear came over me and I full-on panicked. After taking some time to rationalize what had taken place, it dawned on me that the scream that shook the entire house was none other than the panther that was known to stalk the area. Which in reality is far more terrifying than any phantom stalker. I went on to see the panther on several occasions after, but luckily I was never present when it cut loose with any other terrifying cries. Being the insomniac that I am, I was sleeping in the living room on an air mattress at this particular point in time. This way I could watch TV and not disturb my husband as he had to get up early for work. I had managed to doze off during It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia when I started to wake up to the feeling of being stared at. As I was becoming more aware, I felt a hand on my inner thigh applying pressure and forcefully moving up my leg in an assault kind of way, one of several of these types of encounters. I jumped up and threw the blanket off to find absolutely nothing on the bed or in the room with me, anywhere. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for a few nights afterward. My kids and I were living in an apartment building at this time. We were surrounded by close friends and a few relatives. One of my very good friends and his wife lived directly across the balcony from us. I had gone over to visit one afternoon and he began to tell me this story. He said that he had just gotten up out of bed and was walking past his kids' bedroom when he saw movement. His kids were at their mother's house and there shouldn't have been anyone in their bedroom. When he noticed the movement he stopped and looked into the room. He saw my oldest daughter sit straight up in the bed, and when she turned her head to face him he could see her clearly. He said she didn't have any eyes. There were empty sockets where her eyes should have been. He then slammed the door and would absolutely not let anyone go into that room. He was a large, formidable man, and I don't ever recall him being afraid of anything. Ever. But this thing scared the hell out of him. Well, this and any talk of demons and such. As I mentioned before, my kids and I were living in the same apartment at this time. One of my very good friends and his wife lived directly across the balcony from us. I came home one evening from work and his wife caught me outside and was freaking out, telling me she had seen me standing in their hallway and that I was blocking her from leaving their bedroom. She said I was standing there with my hair down covering my face, which would absolutely have been possible as I do have long black hair, but I was never there. I looked at her and kind of laughed, but she was clearly shaken. She said, "It ain't funny. I saw you there." She was very aware that these things happen around me and always have. We had talked many times about it before. I suppose the difference was that it had never messed with her like that until then. I sat with her for a while and talked with her. I told her if it ever happened again to call me and I would come straight home and stay with her until her husband got home. After a while she finally calmed down and went home. For reference, I am female. When I was a kid, a new girl moved into our neighborhood. At first my cousins and I would hide out and watch her and all the weird things curious little kids do. Finally one day I met her and we became very fast friends. She lived there for about a year, then they moved away. The place they moved to was about 45 minutes or so from my hometown, so once I was able to visit her. The weekend that I was allowed to go stay with her, we, of course, went exploring together. The place they had moved to was completely surrounded by woods, and there was a creek running through. It had huge boulders on either side of it and was really a magical place, for a kid. As we were climbing on the rock formations, we started to hear a weird sound, almost like humming. Keep in mind we are now quite a ways from her house and don't know anything at all about the area. The farther we moved down the creek bank, the louder it got. We finally decided to climb over the rocks and look down into the creek. When we did this, we saw several people standing just below us. They were wearing solid white linen robes. They were all in a circle holding hands, chanting, and there was a star in a circle in the midst of them. We lay there on top of the rocks watching them for a few seconds, then one of them looked up toward us. We were on our feet and moving as fast as we could, back toward what we were praying was her house. We finally made it, mostly unscathed, sans the heart attack. Her mom was there and at the sight of us became a little concerned. We were pale, sweating, and completely freaked out. We didn't tell her a thing, though, just that we were racing. I don't think she believed us, but neither of us was about to utter a word. At the end of the weekend I went back home and never got to go back to visit her again. I was living in an apartment with the kids and my ex-husband at this time. He was a hardcore, nothing can shake him, not even his own personal attacks, skeptic. He had witnessed several things through all of the years we were together and still would never admit anything. He witnessed our bed shaking with us in it and swore it was an earthquake though nothing else was moving. A demon woke him up twice out of a deep sleep and scared him so bad he couldn't even scream. He saw a spoon fly across our kitchen while we were in a fight. He witnessed a bar stool spin for absolutely no reason and claimed, "This house needs to be leveled," and the list goes on. Well, one evening when I came home from work I walked up the stairs and lo and behold, there sat my husband in all his skeptical glory, outside, on the balcony, waiting for me to get there. I was walking by him when he said, "I think I need to join the crazy crew," and pointed at my shirt. I looked down wondering what he was talking about and realized I was wearing one of our investigation team shirts. I looked at him and he started telling me his story. Mind you, he does not believe in anything paranormal. He started with, "I walked past their room, talking about the kid's bedroom, and saw Tyler run across the bedroom toward the window." I said, "Okay, so?" He said, "The kids aren't here. I saw and heard her running across the room." I said, "Ah, well. Welcome," and walked away laughing and shaking my head. My mother and I were staying the night at her boyfriend's house one night when I was around 14 years old. When we all decided to go to bed, I was going to stay the night in his empty bedroom. He gave me a couple blankets to make a pallet, so I fixed myself a bed and hit the floor. I was laying there trying to go to sleep, and as I lay there I had a strange feeling come over me. It felt like someone was in the room looking at me. There is nothing in this room besides a stereo and a couple small boxes of his belongings. There was absolutely no place for a person to hide, so I try to forget about it. The feeling keeps getting more intense the longer I lay there. I turn flat on my back, and put my hands behind my head. Just then I started to tingle from head to toe, painful tingling like a waking limb, and I couldn't move. I was afraid I might have been going to have a seizure, a stroke, something. The fear was overwhelming. Then suddenly a bright ball of light shot straight up from my solar plexus, and hovered about 2 feet above me. I felt like it was looking at me. I was definitely looking at it. It was there for no longer than a minute, then shot through the door and was gone. I don't believe in spirit orbs, in photos or otherwise anymore, but this was no photo. This thing was a ball of light, orb for lack of any better explanation. It was not a dust particle, bug, or some crazy reflection in a photograph. I don't know if it was trying to freak me out. I don't know if it was protecting me from something that was actually trying to enter my body. I can say that while I was looking at it, the feeling of fear was gone. I can also say this was the brightest, clearest, prettiest white light I have ever seen. It didn't hurt my eyes, and I didn't have any burns on any of my skin from it. To this day, I just don't know. This is not really a story of my own, but it's one that I recall from my childhood. When I was young, my mother worked at a convenience store in the small town where we lived. She was at work one afternoon and was talking on the phone with a coworker of hers named Robin. As they were chatting, they heard a really loud, raspy whisper of a voice come on the line. The voice said, "Robin." Robin was freaked out, and within a millisecond she abruptly hung up. My uncle had been shipped out for his annual 2-week guard duty for the U.S. National Guard. He asked one of my cousins to stay with his 2 young kids for the duration of camp. She obliged, and within a day there were several of us staying there with them. Looking back, I believe it was because she was afraid to stay there alone. His place does have a certain spooky curb appeal to it, and then some. A couple nights later we were all sitting around talking and cutting up when a weird sound I can't really explain starts outside the window directly across the table from us. It's a large plate glass and there is no way to open it, so I got up and walked to the back door a few feet to the left of the window and opened the door. I stepped outside and looked around. There was nothing. No breeze, no person, no animal, nothing. I walked back inside and shut the door. I went back to the table and reported that all was clear. Just as I did, the window bent in so far that it should have shattered from the pressure. We all jumped up and watched in wide-eyed, mouth agape, astonishment as it did this again. Needless to say, we were all piling out the front door, off the deck, and running. As we are running, one of our friends grabs me and turns me around and in a loud whisper says, "Do you hear that?" I stop and listen, and there are very loud, distinct sounds of several people running after us. Which is all well and good, except she and I were the only ones standing there. Everyone else had been so scared they never even looked back, much less slowed their pace. I bolted and left her behind. As the rest of us managed to reach the top of the hill, the sound had stopped, and we stood there talking, trying to figure out what was happening. After a while we had decided maybe it was gone and we would be alright to go back. When we walked in, everything was clear, everything was in its place, the window was still intact. I was standing in the front door looking around. Something just felt off. I looked at everyone and was trying to tell if anyone else was feeling strange. They all seemed normal, so I walked on in and sat down to join in the conversation. A bit later we all managed to lay down to try to get some sleep. I was laying on the couch next to the front door. As I lay there I started to hear a faint vibration type sound. It sounded like the metal roof over the front deck was vibrating very lightly. There was no curtain on the window, which was also a large plate glass, so I sat up and had a look around. The dim security light showed the deck to be clear, so I fell back on the couch and tried to get comfortable. A minute after I did, there was a loud bang, and everyone in the house jumped up and listened. We started to hear someone walking on the deck. It sounded like they were wearing heavy boots, and they were pacing from one end of the deck to the other. Suffice it to say, no one slept that night. For reference, I am female. In the summer of 2016, we went to the lake for a weekend camping trip. The first night was completely uneventful, then came the second. We had decided to move to a different spot closer to the restroom, for showering convenience, but also, it was a more secluded area. This way we could be a little less crowded in and surrounded by people we didn't know. It was well after dark, so we decided it was time to get settled in for the night. I decided to walk across the road because there was the comfort of a restroom and shower house. I took the normal stuff along with me. Towel, shampoo, clothes, etc. As I was in the middle of showering, I heard a woman's voice begin to sing. I didn't think too much of it seeing how it was a public area and we weren't the only ones camping. As I showered on, the voice was gradually getting louder. By the time I realized there was no one actually there, it sounded like she was standing less than a foot away from me, just outside the shower curtain. I was pretty freaked at this point. I threw my clothes on, inside the shower with the water still running, and soaking wet, I ran out of the restroom. I heard her laugh as I hightailed it across the road, back to our site. Needless to say, I didn't go back alone after dark. When I was 17 years old, I lived with a close friend of mine and her family. After I moved in with them, she and I would go out to the garage/shed in the backyard to smoke. We found all types of strange things like pentagrams and such painted on the walls and ceiling, and we later found the same kind of things in the cellar. We didn't think much of it, we just kind of laughed it off and went back in the house. About a month after I moved in, she had gone out with a friend of ours, and I stayed home. I was laying in bed late that night, upset, due to a fight earlier in the evening with my boyfriend at the time. As I was laying there, I kept feeling like something was staring at me. I turned over in the bed and looked into the kitchen, but it was pitch black. All the lights in the house were off because everyone had gone to bed earlier. I started to raise my head up off the pillow, and something jumped from the kitchen doorway, across the room, and was on top of me in a split second. I was pinned. There was something that I could not see on top of me. It was holding my mouth and nose and was violently shaking my entire body. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I was terrified. The attack only lasted seconds, a minute at the very most, but it felt like an eternity. It was over just as abruptly as it had begun. When it let go of me, I sat straight up in the bed, gasping for air and looking wildly around the room for any sign of any culprit. There was absolutely nothing to be found. I will never, in my entire life, forget the fear I felt at that time, or the feeling that it has left with me through all of these years since. As I mentioned previously, I had been living with a friend and her family when I was 17 years old, in a house on Willis Street. One evening, my friend, her mom, my friend's little brother, and I were watching TV, when my friend had decided to take a quick shower. A short time later, she came through the house like a bull in a china shop. She snatched her brother up, and commenced to wail on him. In shock, her mom, and I, started pulling her off of him, and were asking what her problem was. She yelled, "He broke my f***ing ring." Bewildered, we both, her mother and I, argued with her that he had been in the living room, with us, the entire time. She argued that he had broken into the bathroom, and broke the ring. After she settled down a bit, we explained that he had never even left the room we were in, at least not long enough to break in and do that to her ring. So she showed us the ring. It was a gold ring that her grandmother had given to her, and one that she had cherished. It was completely twisted up, like a little wire twist tie on a bread bag. We were all shocked. There was no way any adult person could have done that to her ring, with any kind of tool, much less her little brother with his bare hands. It was insane. There was absolutely no explanation. She was wearing the ring when she went into the bathroom, took it off and set it down next to the sink. Somehow, without either her or any of us knowing, something was in the bathroom with her while she was in the shower, and had twisted that ring up like it was nothing, and put it back exactly where it had been when she laid it down to begin with. When I was about 17 years old, my cousin and I were walking from her house, which was outside city limits, to my dad's house, in town. It was around 10 p.m., and it was pitch black outside. The area where we were walking didn't have any street lights, nor was there any moonlight on this particular night. It was kind of eerie to say the least. As we walked, she prattled on about something or other. To be honest, I wasn't listening. As we were getting closer to the top of the hill, an eerie feeling came over me. The farther we walked, the more the feeling intensified. It was a very heavy feeling of being watched, and it was coming from all around us. I slowed my pace, and eventually came to a complete stop. As I stood there, I listened for any movement. I heard nothing. I took a good look around. Nothing. When I turned back to start walking again, I saw it. It was standing off the side of the road just ahead of us behind some brush. It was statue still, over 7 feet tall, and was wearing something that looked like a cloak. The cloak was covering it head to toe. Completely. I could not see its face at all, and it never made a sound, or moved, but I knew it was watching us, and had been since we left her house. I grabbed her by the arm, and blasted off, running back toward her house. I don't think her feet ever touched the ground again, until we were back at her place. She didn't have a chance to see it before I grabbed her and started running, but I'll never forget it. We both still to this day live just within a block or so of where this incident took place. She still gets creeped out by that corner at night. Back when this happened, her brother was out in the woods digging up graves and doing stupid stuff. And not too long before this incident, he kept telling me there was a minotaur type thing that he kept seeing. He said it would come out from the woods next to their house and watch him and his friend while they were messing around outside. He said it walked on 2 legs, had the head of a bull, and had a pentagram on its stomach. I laughed and told him he was crazy, but honestly, maybe that was what I saw that night. Who can really say? For reference, I am female. I currently live in an area on a hill, outside of city limits. I am surrounded by a few family members, old family friends, a couple strangers, and a lot of woods. It's fairly country out here. Anyway, one night last summer, a friend and I were just down the hill, about the equivalent of 2 blocks away from my house. We were hanging out with one of my cousins at her house. We would oftentimes go spend time with her, sitting on the porch in the evenings, and to all hours of the night keeping her company. The reason for this is, her husband was a cop, and he worked the evening shift on patrol, with the sheriff's department, and she was bored and honestly probably kind of unnerved by some of the things people would say to her husband when he would arrest them. He had gotten a few, we'll call them threats, from people he had arrested for various offenses. She was telling us about someone that he had taken to jail a couple weeks before. She said the person told her husband what the inside of their house looked like, what their work shifts were, how many kids they have, and several other things that they shouldn't have known. She had also told us that one night after she had put the kids to bed, she had gotten into the bath to soak and relax for a bit, when she heard someone come into the house. She said she heard the front door open, someone come in, they walked around the inside of the house, and went back out the front door, and closed it. She jumped out of the bath, and grabbed her gun, went through the house, but she didn't find anyone. Some time after this, we were visiting with her again, sitting on the porch, enjoying the late evening. We were laughing and cutting up when I looked across the bridge that was between her place and mine, and I saw a huge man run across the road under the security light at the far end. I said, "What the f***," and everybody looked up. As I was watching for the man, they all saw 4 or 5 kids running in the dark into the field, directly across from where we were. I never saw any kids. We all took off after whoever it was, determined to catch them. About this time, her husband drives up in his police cruiser. It was pretty late by now, around 3 a.m., and he was off duty. We all heard someone run down the side of the bridge, into the creek bed, so we ran to the bridge, and started pacing back and forth, looking over the rail, trying to see someone. As I leaned completely over the rail, one of them stepped up, out of the dark, right in front of me. It startled me, and I couldn't do anything except involuntarily react. Instantly, I went into fight mode. I jumped and reached over the rail, grabbed him, and yanked him over to me, all in one swift movement. When I did, everyone ran over to me, and at that point we all realized, we knew the kid. He was pale, clammy, and shaking. We all knew immediately that he was under the influence of some kind of substance, and had managed to sneak out of the house. My cousin's husband had already radioed for backup, so by now, cop cars were pulling up as this was happening. I called the kid's mom, another cousin, and told her to come get him. We didn't find anyone else, but another kid that was sneaking around with him did come back, because, well, he was staying the weekend at their house, and had nowhere else to go. When everything settled down, we were all talking about what had transpired, and my story was completely different, up until the point that we all went after whoever was sneaking around. They all swore they only saw the kids across the road, which I never saw, and they never saw a man, which is exactly what I saw. In the end we had to agree to disagree. I felt like I was leaving them, with someone stalking their house that night. But honestly, that's nothing new for where we live. Strange things happen out here. I was working privately for a hospice patient at this time, and one of the other caretakers, as there were 4 of us, started to notice strange things going on in this patient's home. We started talking about it one evening, when I came in to relieve the girl on the shift before me for the night. She asked me, "Have you noticed anything weird going on in here?" My reply was, "No, just the feeling of someone watching me at times, no big deal," and we left it at that. The following evening, she was really bothered by something, and started to talk to me about it again. As she was talking, I saw a lady look around the bedroom door, which happened to be directly behind my coworker. The lady was looking straight at me. And I looked back at her. I never said a word to my coworker. She went on to tell me that things were being moved. She would often feel that someone was watching her, and it felt like they were breathing down her neck at times. She also said that she heard someone talking in the house, and other things. These were all things I was pretty used to by this time, so I can't necessarily say I was creeped out by it. I just let her talk until she was ready to leave. I walked her to her car, as it was dark, and she was scared. I waved goodbye to her as she left, then I went back into the house. When I walked through the door, I had an overwhelming feeling of someone in the room with me. I sighed, and told it to get out. It left me alone for the remainder of my evening. When my shift relief came in later that night, I said my goodbyes, and walked out of the house. As soon as I stepped off the front porch, I was hit by fight or flight. I kept it together, and coolly walked to my car. When I got in and shut the door, there was a suffocating pressure all around me. I started the car and hightailed it out of there. I had managed to make it about 7 miles down the road before I saw it, sitting up, in the back seat of my car. Every hair on my body stood up. I'm doing 80 miles per hour down the highway and I'm closed in with this thing. With all the authority I could muster, I said, "Get the f*** out of my car. You will not go home with me." As soon as I confronted the entity, it was gone. I never had it try to go home with me again after that, but I couldn't stop it from staying at the patient's house. We all ended up having to deal with it from time to time, but as time went on, we all left and the patient passed away. At first glance, that house was a sweet little country lake house. But I gotta say, looks are awful deceiving. A bit of a side note, this patient's grandson had been sent to Afghanistan a couple months prior to these things beginning. His life ended only weeks after he had arrived. He was sent back home, to the United States, for his burial. He was very young, no more than 25 years old. For reference, I am female. My aunt lived right next door to a close friend of mine when I was a young teenager, around 13 or so. Since I was staying the night with my friend, I figured I would go over and say hello to my aunt. I visited with her and my older cousins until well after dark, then I figured I'd better be getting back to my friend's house. I said my goodbyes and walked out the front door. Just as I closed the door, a strange feeling came over me. I looked around and didn't see anything, so I continued on. As I stepped off the porch at the end of her house, I saw something crouching in the grass against the end of the house. It was solid black, there were no features to be seen. It made a low growling sound and stood up on two legs. I am 5 feet 4 inches tall, and this thing towered over me. I ran for my life. I came busting through my friend's front door, slammed the door, and threw myself against it. I was panicking so bad, I thought I was going to pass out. When I looked up, my friend and her mom were staring at me, both with a wide-eyed, shocked look on their faces. Her mom said, "What are you doing?" To which I replied, "It was after me." After I had calmed down a little, I told them what had happened. They were both kind of scared something would try to get in the house with us, so we stayed up late waiting, but we never heard a thing from it. A couple days later, I was talking with my cousin's boyfriend about strange things happening, and so I told him about this incident. He was freaked out. He told me that he had been seeing, quote, glowing people in their backyard, but nobody would believe him. He said that he hadn't seen the dark figure yet, but he would run like hell if he did. Well, apparently that was my thought too. One weekend, several friends and I were planning a camping trip. 3 of us had all arrived together. As it turned out, we were the only ones who could make it. So we start our weekend. We put our stuff in the lake house we were staying in, and walked down to the lake for a swim. After a couple hours in the lake and nearly getting killed by a water moccasin, which was apparently swimming with us, we decided to leave the water behind for a while, and walk down the road to visit another of our friends. By the end of the day, we were all exhausted, and went to bed. We had made a makeshift bed so we could all stay in one room, together. We were laying down talking, beginning to doze off, when we heard a scraping sound. Not really thinking much of it at first, we just let it go, figuring it was a tree branch outside, or something of that nature. When the noise got a little louder, the younger of the 3 of us looked up, and started losing her mind. She was screaming, and trying to crawl over me to hide behind me. When I looked up, trying to see whatever she was panicking about, a chair was sitting in the middle of the room, spinning. There was nothing, and no one anywhere near it. My other friend and I watched it for a few seconds until it stopped. We finally got to sleep around daybreak. When we left there we swore never to go back. I have rode horses past that house on several occasions, and always felt like something was watching me, but I never stopped to check it out. I had decided to stay the night with my aunt and my cousins one night. Now it just so happens that the property that her house was sitting on used to belong to another of our cousins, Wally Joe, and his wife Evelyn. They were notorious for drinking entirely too much, and thus ended their lives. One night they were drunk and Evelyn passed out in bed, lit cigarette in hand, and Wally Joe had passed out in the bathtub. Evelyn caught the house on fire, and burned it to the ground, with the 2 of them in it. She was burned to death, in the bed, while he was cooked in the bathtub, or so the story goes. As we were sitting in the living room watching TV, the kitchen light started to turn off and on, thus starting our night of staying up late telling scary stories. It was getting pretty late, so everyone decided to go to bed. I was laying on the couch when the rocking chair next to me started rocking. My aunt hollered from her room, "Wally Joe, go to bed," and the chair stopped rocking and all was quiet. I didn't stay the night on their couch again, for quite some time. I was laying in bed one night, sleeping soundly, when I suddenly woke up, only to see a small boy, standing next to my side of the bed. Thinking it was my son, who was 3 years old at the time, I told him to go back to bed. I turned over, and went back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I had a perfect bite mark on the inside of my left bicep. You could see every little tooth mark. I freaked all the way out. I took off, out the front door, and showed my husband, and my friend who were on the front porch. He looked at it, and of course, wrote it off to something I had done to myself. But have you ever tried to bite the inner part of your upper bicep, all while changing the pattern of your permanent teeth while doing so? It's humanly impossible. But, he was a hardcore skeptic, through and through. I carried the scar from it for years before it finally faded away. And I went on to see this little boy several times over the next year or so, until he finally stopped showing up. Several years ago, back when I had an active investigation team, my partner, and I, had decided to walk out into the woods, to an old house that was abandoned several years prior. The road that led to the house was a long one, and had not been traveled in quite some time. Due to no one keeping up with the area, everything was wild, and wildly overgrown. We had decided it would be best if we parked my car on the side of the highway, and walked the entire rest of the way, which was about 1/10 of a mile off the road. After we had parked, we grabbed whatever gear we were taking with us, and so, we started our journey. We were about 200 yards into the drive, when my partner let out a yelp. Irritated, I said, "What the f*** are you doing?" She replied with, "Something grabbed my f***ing arm." I figured she had gotten her shirt hung up on a tree limb, or something like that. I looked at her, rolled my eyes, and kept on walking. When we finally got to about 150 feet of the house, a really loud bang shot through the area. It sounded like someone was hitting something, inside the house, with a sledgehammer. We stopped walking, and looked at each other. I kind of shrugged, and started toward the house again. And again, the same as before, the loud bang. Before I could turn and say anything, my partner said, "Let's go. We gotta go." So we turned and headed back to the car. The entire time we were walking and talking, I had a digital voice recorder running. And the entire way to the house, and back to the car, it picked up several voices, besides our own. There was hissing, whispering, and the sounds of hushed conversations. But, at the exact moment she was supposedly grabbed, there was an angry male voice that came across the recorder. The following day, as I was working on reviewing all of the footage, pictures, EVPs, and such, my partner came over. She said, "Check this shit out," and laid her arm out on the table next to me. There was a bruise, and it was almost the size of the Pepsi can, that was sitting next to her. I said, "What's that about?" She said, "That's where it grabbed me." I kind of felt bad for not believing her when she told me something had grabbed her. After this incident, I definitely started to cut her a little slack when she would say these kind of things had happened to her. So, as I mentioned before, I was a co-founder of a paranormal research team. My partner and myself had decided to unofficially check out a cemetery that several people had told us about. We arrive, get our cameras, and voice recorders ready to go, and begin the long stroll across the lawn. We were walking down a dense row of cedar trees, and we were talking, snapping pictures, and recording as was our usual beginning. As we stepped past the end of the line of trees, I looked up, and noticed what looked like a marble statue of a man, standing on top of an old concrete pedestal. As my partner took another step, I saw the man's head turn to face us. She was mid-stride when the man came off the pedestal and came running toward us. I yelled, "Oh shit," grabbed her arm, and ran for my life back to the car. As we were trying to get in the car, something huge came crashing through the trees toward us. Now, when I say huge, I mean these trees were over 40 feet tall, and the tops of them were swaying, like a tornado was on the verge of relocating them, on this clear sunny evening. We literally threw our equipment, which was still running, in the car, shut and locked the doors, and hauled it out of there. She was saying a prayer of protection, as I drove like a maniac out of there. When we got home, and were reviewing the footage and the voice recordings, we heard her reciting the prayer for protection, and we heard another deep, gravelly voice talking. It was in the car with us. Clearly the hedge of protection was in full effect while we were running for our lives. I was laying in bed one night, sleeping soundly, when I was awakened by a very familiar sound. A very low, deep growl, about 1.5 feet from my face. I was very tired, and not thinking very clearly, so I said, "Spaghetti, shut up." Spaghetti was a little dog that we'd had. Just as the words left my mouth, I realized that he wasn't with us anymore. As the realization set in, my entire bed shook, like someone had shoved it really hard. Then all was quiet. Suffice it to say, I was over the whole idea of sleep for the rest of the night. My husband, our kids, and I lived in an apartment. One evening, he and I had stayed up watching TV. It had gotten pretty late, so we decided to give up and go to bed. We got dressed for bed and went into the bedroom to lay down. He was always really fast to go to sleep, but I, on the other hand, have always taken forever to settle down and drift off. We had been in bed about 15 minutes. He was already sound asleep, and I was on my 9,000th sheep when the bed moved a little. It felt like someone kicked it. Not necessarily violently, but hard enough. Then out of nowhere, the bed started to shake, violently. Like, jumping up and down off the floor, breaking one of the legs in the process. I jumped up out of the bed, and he was sitting up, confused as hell. He said, "What the f*** was that?" I said, "I don't know." We were both really freaked out by it, but 2 minutes later, he was back to sleep, and 2 days later, I was still awake. Some time later, because this was the bigger of the 2 bedrooms, we moved the 3 kids into this room, and we took the smaller bedroom. They hadn't been in this room for very long before our oldest started to play with someone unseen in the middle of the night. But those are whole other stories in and of themselves. My husband, myself, and our kids lived in a ground floor apartment at this time. Our bedroom was on the very end of the building, and the only window faced the parking lot. There was a security light about 30 feet from that part of the building, and it always shined into our bedroom at night. One night we were laying in bed, and I noticed something at the window. I lay there and watched for a little while. Once I woke all the way, I realized it was the silhouette of a fairly large person. Just standing there. I didn't know if they were facing the window, or if they had their back turned to it. I didn't know if they were trying to hide from the police, though they were doing a poor job of it. I didn't have a clue what they were doing. But, what I did know was that, just to the side of them, was the window to the kids' bedroom, and I wasn't having none of those shenanigans. I jumped up out of bed, stepped over to the window, watching the person stand there the entire time, and I yanked the curtain back. There was no one there. Nothing. At all. I stood there shocked for a minute, and waited for someone to step around the corner to face me, or to do anything at all really. But nothing else ever happened that night. One day, one of my friends and myself had gone to visit my mother. She lives about 35 miles from me. We had all decided to go to town for some reason or other, so we all piled into my mother's car. We backed out of the driveway and headed down the road. We had managed to get no more than a block from her house when her phone started to ring. We all heard it loud and clear. Her ringtone at the time was one that had a silly voice, and when you had an incoming call it said, "Ring. Ring ring." Then yelled, "Ring," like a maniac. It was pretty loud, and you really couldn't miss it when her phone would ring. We got to the stop sign at the end of her block, and she started to look through her purse for the phone. She looked up at me, and of course I was watching her dig around. She raised her eyebrows and said, "I left my phone at the house." We all laughed and went on to town. I was laying in bed, sound asleep, one morning around 6:45. Suddenly there started really loud banging at the front door. I thought the cops were looking for someone. So I got up and went to answer the door. When I opened the door, there was no one there. No one was on the balcony, in the breezeway, in the yard, nowhere. But they were still beating on the door as I jerked it open. I shut the door and started to get dressed for the day since I was up. A couple minutes later my phone rang. It was my partner. We had a paranormal investigation team together. She told me that she was just in a fight with a girl that we were both working with. She said things got pretty heated, and they were on the verge of putting hands on each other. I said, "Oh really? Well, your rage was beating on my door." It happened at the same exact time. One evening, my kids and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. All was well, then, the knocking started. It was knocking across the wall that was between the living room and my bedroom, which was behind the couch we were sitting on, and was right behind our heads. It would start at one end of the wall, knock all the way across to the other end, and back again. Over and over every few seconds or so, and would last for several minutes. Back and forth, then eventually it stopped. Not so much scary as it is annoying, unless you're alone. I used to work in hospice. For any who don't know, this is end-of-life care. If an individual is given 6 months or less to live, they may be enrolled in a hospice program. When someone is on hospice, we come in and care for them until they pass away. I was caring for one of my patients, in her home one afternoon, handling some of the usual daily needs, when her dog put his head down, started to growl, and began to walk toward the kitchen. There was a sliding glass door that opened into the backyard off the kitchen, which was an open concept and was sharing the space with the living room, which is where my patient and myself happened to be at this time. The dog and I both heard someone knocking on the glass door. We were both looking right at it, in broad daylight when the knocking started, the entire time it was happening, and when it stopped. There was nothing there, at all. This patient ended up passing away a few days later. I had taken the trash out one night, and as I usually did, I turned to walk back to the house. As I done so, I heard a low growl coming from across the road. I just figured it was one of the neighbor's dogs or something, so I started walking back toward the house. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had a feeling like something was moving toward me, so I picked up the pace a little bit. Not a second later, I heard a loud growl, then someone, or something, running toward me. I bolted up the stairs on the front porch, ran in the house and slammed the door. What, or whomever it was, never came up on the porch. I was laying on the couch one evening, watching TV, and my pit bull, Sky, was laying in the floor across the room from me, sleeping. She suddenly jumped up, and started growling, and was looking directly toward me. I thought, oh Lord, this is how it ends. She eased across the room toward me, growling, baring teeth, hackles raised. I was watching her, and I thought she was watching me. She eased up to the side of the couch, and that was when I realized she was looking just past me, and into the kitchen. I caught a quick sense of relief, then panic set in. She was looking at something, in the kitchen. She climbed up on top of me, on the couch, and tried to cover as much of my body as she could, all while keeping her eyes on whatever was in the kitchen. I had shut the TV off, and when I looked at the screen, I saw the reflection of a man. He was wearing an old black suit and tie, and he was just standing there. In my kitchen. I turned around and looked into the kitchen and saw nothing. I could not see him at all, except for his reflection that was on the TV screen. He was only there for a few more seconds, and then he disappeared. Instantly, Sky relaxed and went back to being her normal self. I absolutely loved her, but after this incident, I adored her all the more. She was so strong and brave. She was our protector. I still miss her to this very day. I was living with my then boyfriend in an apartment building at this time. This particular building was a pretty large, Victorian-style house that was converted into various apartments. It was pretty early one morning, and we were both getting ready to go to work, when we heard talking coming from the kitchen. We brushed it off as someone outside being loud or something of that nature. That evening, after we'd had dinner and cleaned up, we were sitting in the living room watching TV. We heard what sounded like whispering, coming from the bedroom, then someone walking down the hallway and into the kitchen. Thinking someone might have broken in the back door and came in, I grabbed the gun, and the search for an intruder began. We looked everywhere. In closets, the bathroom, in the kitchen cabinets, everywhere. We found absolutely nothing. All of the doors and windows were closed, locked, and in order. We were puzzled, for sure, so we just went back to the living room and back to watching TV. A few days later, I saw a guy whom I had never seen before. He was outside our living room window, walking across the top of the fence. Arms held out to his sides as if for balance, and walking along the top of the fence. My initial reaction was, what the hell? But I went outside to talk to him anyway. I don't remember what he said his name was, but he wanted to introduce me to his girlfriend, so I obliged. As we were walking up the stairs to his apartment, which was directly upstairs from mine, and one that I thought was empty, he said, and I quote, "There are things in here, but don't be scared." I thought, oh dear God, I've found Ted Bundy. But I went anyway. There was just a feeling that I can't describe coming off of him, and I absolutely could not stop following him. But he was right, there was something in there. He introduced me to his girlfriend, and she started to show me around their place. I still had that weird feeling, pulling me in. She stopped in front of what I thought was a window with a curtain over it. As we stood there she said, "I'm going to show you this room, but don't be afraid. I'm already here, it's already going down. If they are about to do something weird, or murder me, I can't stop it now. All I can say is, okay." She pulls back the curtain, and there is not a window, but a room beyond. They have a huge pentagram on the floor, candles all around the room, some kind of shrine against the far wall, books, chalices, tarot cards, strange pictures, and they're burning sage. I don't know much about the supernatural at this point, but I do know that people burn sage to rid themselves of evil spirits. She proceeds to tell me that they are into witchcraft, and study magic, and are also into Wicca, though there's not really much difference in the three. She said that they have been battling a spirit that won't leave, and that if there has been anything bothering us in our apartment, she is truly sorry. Aha! Now I know what's happening. Things got worse in that apartment before they got better, but I moved shortly after, and oddly so did they. My guess is, they brought me in and talked to me because they felt bad for conjuring something that they couldn't handle, and it wasn't just their problem, now, it was ours too. The building's owner has since torn the place down, so now, there is an empty lot where this place used to be. We currently have an entity that we call Peggy. We do not do this in a loving manner. Honestly, we do not like Peggy, at all. But I have yet to rid our home of it. The name came about after my oldest daughter watched something about the haunted Peggy doll, hence the name. One Sunday evening, my oldest daughter's boyfriend had been over visiting for the day, but the time had rolled around for him to go home. So, my oldest daughter, my younger daughter, and my friend left to take him home. They had been gone for about 15 minutes or so when my son and I heard my younger daughter jump in her bedroom. We even felt it shake the house. This is normal with her, it's something she does all the time, as she is autistic. I looked at my son and said, "Didn't she go with them to take him home?" He said, "Yeah, I think so." So I text my older daughter to ask and make sure she had gone with them. She confirmed that she was, indeed, in the car with them. Thank you all for joining me for Series 1 of SinisterFido Reads. I'm really glad that you've decided to join me. I look forward to our journey through Series 2. And I do hope that you'll join me there. If you have a true scary story, and would like to hear it on this channel, please submit it to SinisterFido@gmail.com. And until next time, stay sinister.